and and so there, in good improvisation, there is that union of cold and hot cognition. You can predict how people will respond, and so you give them in part what they will respond to, but you take them in a new direction.
But what else can progressive politicians, I'm not necessarily putting Biden in that category, but certainly more progressive than Donald Trump, what can they learn from him in terms of engaging with their audiences? Because it seems like a lot of what has coalesced in the Democratic Party has been sort of like opposition to Trump as opposed to real engagement with particular figures or particular issues that are actually being pushed by the Democratic Party. Aside from just the basic policy issues and actually getting something done socially as a strategy. How can improvisation be used by the Democratic Party to gather that same energy that exists on the right? And do you see anybody, outside of what you mentioned with Biden, who is really moving in that direction to engage people? Because it seems to me that Democrats are much more staid, much more structured, hide much more behind that kind of, built delivery as opposed to, just going for it. And they ought to just go for it more often, I believe.
Well, it's the Republicans who have the talking points that they get by facts, right? Back in the day,
right,
and follow religiously.
Right.
Democrats are famous for the circular firing squads, which I guess is an improvisation, not one to pursue. But I think the first lesson is this isn't to speak directly to your question, but one of the things we need to learn from Trump is that there really is now mainstream concern about being left behind and not being heard. I mean, that the thing that his base feels is that they were left behind, and Trump was the first to hear it.
Yeah.
There for his first opponent, they were a basket of deplorables. For Obama, even they were, unhappy people who clung to religious this or that.
Yeah.
I just learned something about Barack Hussein Obama's name. Barak is an Arabic word, which in West Africa would translate as Ashe. Ashe is the spirit of bravado that is the essence of fruitfulness in the world. So, his un-American name actually had great import that they never played on, but it's the trickster who is the real voice and springboard of improv, the king of the Lord of Liars, the guy who's ever playful and who's very fast on his feet.
Right.
He easily slides over into con man. That's the slippery slope that Trump slid down. He went from trickster to con man. But trickster is the possessor of Ashe, of this Barak.
Well, if you just improvise off of Barack's name, you could come up with something like we will Barack you. I mean, just run with something, because you can. I mean, that it obviously some stuff like that doesn't always work. But and if you listen to the totality of a speech that Donald Trump gives, it is kind of like jazz in those like false notes that he hits all the time, and then they isolate those, and we see them on the news and we laugh at them. But what he's really doing is cycling through a test to see like which works and which doesn't, and then he takes those and then he repeats them again, and he uses them again, and he uses that to generate that audience. And it seems like Democrats, even Barack Obama, who had the ability to improvise and do great things in the moment, did not have that same ear in terms of like trying something and then like revising it. It's like a stand-up comic who goes through every night and does his set and hears the things that the audience responds to and then changes the set as a result. And that's not what I was hearing. It seems like both Obama and Biden only kind of grudgingly respond to people who are the base of their party. And I think we see that with Gaza, whether you talk about policy or not. Because, I mean, if you look at it, we're purely talking about rhetorical terms here. Trump doesn't actually do the things that he says he's going to do, but he's making all these rhetorical gestures that whip up the crowd and get them going and engage them. And yet the Democrats are not doing the same thing. And so, like, to a broad swath of the American people, I think that by comparison, even though, like, Trump may be lying about stuff, they appear on a visceral level to be lackluster. And they're not engaging, and they're not responding, and people sense that, and people feel that. And like when you have that in combination with like a huge amount of like young people and progressive people saying what they're saying about Gaza and protesting and standing up at different events and just being like kicked out and not being responded to. Except after months and months and months of this, it feels like, well, they're not paying attention to me. And that's the same frustration, I think, that a lot of people who originally went into the Trump camp were feeling. And on a visceral level, I think that if the Democratic Party wants to do anything and engage in that way, they have to like adapt some of these strategies. Again, aside from actually doing the same things that they say that they're going to do, which, again, Trump does not, and give people the sense that there's something there, that they have some sort of social connection with them that gets them on board and gets them energized and gets them organized, which is a key thing that Trump has done in order to make his strategy for getting elected work. And I think that's really critical.
One of the things that gives Trump such luster is social media. He came along with his lies right when social media, which is also one big improvisation.
Right.
The algorithm is given only one charge: increase engagement, increase the customer base. But using machine learning, it quickly it taught itself that the best way to do that is by increasing anger and fear.
Right.
So Trump came along right at a time when, the media loved him for the same reason. He increased engagement and fear and lies and anger and whatnot. And social media was doing the same in the robots, of course, which are another autonomous, spontaneous, improvised beast. So it was a triple threat, and we are the victims of it. So one of the things I may not have a political improviser to hand to offer to you, but I do know we need to do something about social media, and soon. In my conclusion, I offer some reflections on some of the things happening, efforts to use social media in more responsible ways to create community. One of the things that's being lost in all this is, well, first, when you realize that the gesture of spontaneity is a persuasive device, the paradox is that it's being used to persuade us not to persuade one another. At the heart of democracy is the adventure of trying to persuade.
Yeah,
Every voice matters, and through discourse, persuasive discourse, you come to compromises. That's the democratic process. Well, we are now so tribalized that we've decided that those people over there are almost not human and can't be
yeah,
persuaded of anything.
yeah,
And you and I feel that about his base, but somehow, somehow, we need to get back to the errand in the wilderness, which
yeah.
includes trying to persuade one another.
Yeah, it's interesting because the recent State of the Union speech, and indeed the history of responses to the State of the Union speech are something interesting to examine. I was speaking with a weekly guest on our program, John Rothman, who for decades and decades, engaged in like actual formal debates in which you had to improvise and think about what your response was going to be in the moment, and not just have a pre-canned response, which is what Katie Britt's response was to the State of the Union, and what typically they are. They don't actually react to what the president is saying on either side. They just like give a canned speech that is going to be directed not at winning people over, but at consolidating their respective bases. And it would be much more interesting and compelling, I think, if either side were to break away from that structure and just say, "Hey, I'm here's what Biden said. I was taking notes during this thing, and I'm going to respond by saying this, and I'm going to respond by saying this, and I'm going to respond by saying this." It would be much more effective. It would be much more genuine, and we wouldn't go through this ridiculousness of like each time like saying how fake and stupid like each of the responders. And again, I've seen it on either party. If you look at what Steve Beshear from a few years back, if you look at the former governor of Louisiana from a few years before that. Jindal, exactly. Bobby Jindal. Bobby Jindal. Like they always seem staid and ridiculous and canned, and it's much more interesting what goes on in the room itself, because there is, even though it breaks the decorum, it's more real and more engaging, and the response we know is just okay. Yeah, they're going to come out and they're going to give this speech, and it's nothing. It would almost be better to go like Mystery Science Theater 3000 like and respond in a replayed like version of what they were doing, and I'm sure there are people online who do that in real time as well, verbally. But that sort of engagement is much more compelling to me, and I wish I would see more of it.
Responses like you're describing suggest that the Republicans are concerned with policy. They're not going to have a policy rebuttal because they have no policy.
Right.
But I will say about the representative from Alabama,
right.
That we in Louisiana are really grateful for that speech, because finally we don't have the worst rebuttal. It was even worse than Jindal's.
Right.
So we're always in competition with Mississippi and Alabama for who's at the bottom of the list for the education and this and that. So we were grateful for that speech. It certainly was eerie.
Yeah, no, it was very
and not
strange.
Very improvised.
No, and that's the thing. Like it would be better.
But it was going for that same result. It was looking to convey authenticity,
right?
And that's what Trump does with his improvising, by going off script, by leaving the prompter, by saying all kinds of inappropriate, politically incorrect things.
Yeah.
It pushes back, and you speak about breaking decorum. That's exactly what the trope does. It
Right.
says